So let's get into what's happening now in sports in China, because I find this really fascinating. You know, I had this very contentious interview with Mark Cuban when I launched this show. Not the one on Sirius, you know, I think people know this, but actually I'm not sure. We are doing the podcast live now for Sirius XM on the Triumph channel, 111. But later we release it as a podcast. So I don't know how people consume it. But the podcast before Sirius launched about a year ago, and it was our 9th show, October 12th. And he was talking all about Black Lives Matter and how it's important to speak out for what you believe in, human rights abuses. And that's why he defended the logo, BLM, on the basketball courts. Blah, blah, blah. Great. I see it. You know, your deeply held convictions. What about China? What about the hundreds of millions you're taking from China? Because like they're kind of engaged in an ethnic genocide right now. Seems kind of problematic. You want to speak out against them? And boy, oh boy, he wouldn't. And now today, this guy, Enes Kanter, this big basketball player, has gone to the place where no one wanted to go before. There was one guy who spoke out. It was like a team coach or a team manager, but Mark Cuban certainly didn't. So I'll give you just a flavor of what happened with Mark Cuban because we have it queued up, and then I want to get to the news of the day. Enes Kanter taking the stand as boldly and bravely as anybody I've seen. Here was Cuban refusing to do it.
Why would the NBA take $500 million plus from a country that is engaging in ethnic cleansing?
So basically you're saying that nobody should do business with China ever.
Why don't you just answer my question?
No, Megyn, I'm just trying to get to the root of it. So
why would
you're
the
just
NBA
trying to
do that? You are the one who
because
said,
they are a customer. They are a customer of ours. And guess what, Megyn? I'm okay with doing business with China. You know, I wish I could solve all the world's problems, Megyn. I'm sure you do too. But we can't. And so we have to pick our battles. And while you'd like to get proclamations so you can create a clip that says, look what I got Mark to say, you don't want to deal with the actual action item. You might think silence is violence, but action gets change, right? And so when I start to talk about
your action.
He's not alone. That's how most people in the NBA would defend it. They will not condemn China.
Oh my God. I remember listening to that interview at the time, and it was fascinating. I mean, credit to Mark Cuban for showing up and facing the fire, but to just take a step back, I know we'll return to China and the NBA. I found it so fascinating because he had been on such a run on Twitter. He had been tweeting a lot going into that interview, Megyn. And it seemed like he wasn't prepared. And he had these little rejoinders I remember that he was using with you. For instance, at one point you were confronting him with the ratings falling apart for the NBA. And he made some point about the Kentucky Derby having bad ratings. And he said, are horses woke? And you just did the auditory equivalent of just kind of blinking at him and going, no, here's the question. And I think it was just a fascinating just case of somebody getting used to the Twitter environment, how you can have a snappy rejoinder and have your cheering section and walk away, and it leaves them utterly unprepared to deal with a real interview. He fell apart. He was terrible in that interview. It's uncomfortable. He sounds angry. And it's because there's no moral defense. There's no moral defense in doing business with China when you are promoting yourself as a brand in the way that the NBA has. And we can get into that and how they promoted themselves. There's no defense for it. And what gets so frustrating is I actually will take the answer that he eventually gives, which is it's about the money. What gets so frustrating and insulting is when the NBA tries to pretend it's something else. I mean, I'm looking, I could look at just some of the stuff Adam Silver, the commissioner, says is so ridiculous and insulting about their position on China. I remember a few months back where he's asked about it, and I'm reading the quote. You know, as a former political science major from Duke University, I'm still a believer in soft power. I think these cultural exchanges are critically important. And he goes on and on and on again about how this is somehow going to cool the tension between these two nuclear.
This is going to save the Uyghurs, the Muslim minority that's being tortured.
It's ridiculous. And I think there's a component to this conversation that is getting ignored by a lot of the media, though. And that's that we're living in the aftermath of failure. When it comes to the NBA's China policy, to say nothing of the moral concerns you're talking about. The NBA had this big colonial adventure into China. They were going to make a ton of money, and they were going to incubate a bunch of Chinese superstars in the NBA. You know, everybody remembers Yao Ming. He was 7'6" in the early 2000s, and from China,
I know
it was
him.
A big deal. It was a big deal, pardon the pun. So the NBA funded all these academies in China. Adam Silver in 2017, the NBA commissioner, was expressing frustration that there were no NBA players from China. And there are still no NBA players from China. So when you see China punishing the NBA and cutting off contact sporadically as punishment for a player like Enes Kanter, criticizing Xi Jinping, or criticizing the former general manager of the Rockets, now the 76ers, Daryl Morey, for doing a free Hong Kong tweet, there's this element of, well, there's no real leverage that the NBA has over China because China is a very nationalistic country that likes to promote nationalism, and there are no Chinese players in the NBA. So because of that, I just think the dynamic is broken. It's like one of those election nights where you get the results early in the night and you know that South Carolina has gone red or California has gone blue, and we just haven't counted up the votes. The NBA and China is a dead dynamic. It's not going to work. Trying to stand on both of them is like trying to stand on two rafts that are floating in opposite directions. And the NBA has been so cynical on this issue as to be naive. That's my conclusion. I just don't see much of a future for it.
And that's the thing that was so infuriating about, Cuban. And I do give him credit for coming on. And frankly, I probably wouldn't have gone as hard on him if he hadn't been so incendiary on Twitter. He loves to pick fights, especially on these issues, dropping F-bombs, going after people like Ted Cruz, and sort of always trying to get the last word. And with me, it was a real live human being who had facts and, kept pressing him. And it was a different dynamic. I'd love to have him on again. I'll give him a second chance. He could have another bite at the apple. But that's sort of why I really want to get into it, because if you're going to play the moral arbiter of us all and lecture on BLM and why, the United States has so much work to do when it comes to how it treats its people, and then take money from this regime that's forcing sterilizations on women, putting them into work camps against their will and so on, you can spare me. Please, you've lost the moral authority. It's like Joe Biden lecturing us on sexism in the United States when, girls are not getting their heads chopped off by the Taliban in Afghanistan. He can stop. Because they're there exposed because we pulled out so soon. So let me ask you about this guy. It's Enes? It's not Enes Kanter?
Frankly, I just know him as Kanter. Is it Enes? Is it Enes? I'm not sure. I just know he's from Turkey,
badass.
And I know he's an NBA journeyman center who has had many outspoken positions over the years.
Okay, so badass Kanter. He decides, unlike everybody else. So literally the only person who has spoken out about human rights abuses in China is that guy you just mentioned, who's now running the 76ers. And the 76ers are being punished by China, right? They're not airing their games on Tencent. And now Enes's team, because Enes said the following. Here's a clip.
Dear Nike, your company says that you are making a positive impact in our communities. And that is true. Yes. You are here in the United States, but when it comes to China, Nike remains silent. You are scared to speak up. Don't forget, every time you put those shoes on your feet or you put that t-shirt on your back, there are so many tears and so much oppression and so much blood behind it all. To the owner of Nike, Phil Knight, I have a message for you. How about I book a plane tickets for us? Let's fly to China together. We can try to visit these slave labor camps, and you can see it with your own eyes. LeBron James and Michael Jordan, you guys are welcome to come too.
He's like throwing down. All right, so who does he play for?
He plays for the Celtics. He doesn't get a lot of playing time. I would caution a little bit. I do think he's at the end of his career. He's not wrong about anything he's saying. I mean, this is all correct. But he has had a tendency, a little bit like Kyrie Irving, to do attention-getting things. I'm not denying that he feels a moral compunction in this instance, and I'm not denying that there is an element of bravery to it. I just sometimes would caution against just saying, hey, I blanket endorse everything that Kanter says, because you really don't know what the next thing is going to be. But the reason that this has such purchase is because it's true, because it's raw, because these companies, they advertise themselves as virtuous. That's part of their self-branding. Even if people, I don't believe, are that interested in it, I don't think it has much to do with why people resonate to these brands. But the NBA and Nike both have gone all in on this, and it's an obvious vulnerability. So it's hilarious. And there's an element of schadenfreude when somebody like Enes Kanter just takes a fire poker and just presses on it.